Good morning. Today is April 7th. It's Tuesday. And I want to do your objective first. Your objective is I will complete Cornell notes to demonstrate my understanding and knowledge of the women's suffrage movement. Before we get started on that for today, I want to review what you should have learned yesterday. When you were reading and finishing the outline, you should have learned about Frederick Douglass, who was a very influential escaped slave. What was interesting about Frederick Douglass was that he was actually taught to read and write. He was literate. His owner's wife actually taught him to read and write, which was illegal, which we're not sure why she did that. But it was really beneficial to him because after he escaped and went to Philadelphia, he ended up being an abolitionist, and hundreds of people would come at a time to listen to him speak about his life in slavery. And he actually did a lot of speaking up until 1850. In 1850, he ended up having to escape and go to England because they had banished slavery in England. And the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 said that any escaped slave that was found could be taken back and put back into slavery, no matter how long they had been living up north and living as a free person. So he had to escape to England. You should have read about Sojourner Truth yesterday. She was a woman who actually escaped slavery from New York, which is weird because most of us don't think about slavery up north, but there were slaves in every state through the 1800s. And then the North eventually banned all their slavery, and the South continued having slavery until after the Civil War. But anyway, Sojourner Truth was an abolitionist, and she was a poet. She wrote works on slavery, on abolitionist movement, as well as for women's suffrage. Her most famous poem is called Ain't I a Woman? And if you get a chance to go online and locate that, they have very famous women have read her poetry, and it's really cool to listen to someone speak the words, not just read them. The next thing you should have read about was the Underground Railroad, which is neither underground nor railroad. The most famous conductor or person who helped lead other slaves out of slavery would have been Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman ran away and went up north, and instead of just living her life as a free person living up north, she actually came down many times to the south and helped many people escape slavery by taking them to safe house to safe house. She was definitely someone that the Southern people would have loved to have got their hands on. Had she been caught, they would have definitely hanged her, or back then that would have been a lynching, because she was giving people hope. And a lot of people were trying to break away because they'd heard the stories about Harriet Tubman, and she'd helped so many people escape. Remember, the Underground Railroad was actually a sequence of homes where people lived and were willing to help escape slaves. The slaves would hide at night and run and get to the next house. Once they got there, they would be taken in. They would be hidden in basements, behind walls. They were let sleep and given food and water, and they would take off the next night until they got up north. They followed the North Star, knowing that would take them to freedom. Once they got over the Ohio River, they were into freedom. They also talked about the reaction. The northern people, a lot of people have this misidea that it was okay that the northern people all wanted slavery. Not true. Most of the poor people that lived up north were just barely making it. They were not paid very well. They were living 10, 12 people in like a one-bedroom apartment. They were living in the slums. There'd be hundreds of people using the same outhouse. Life was really bad for the northern workers. And if the slaves were all freed, many of them would have moved from the south to the north, and they were afraid that they would be willing to work for cheaper rates than they were willing to work for, and they weren't even making it, or just barely making it with the wages they were already making. If the slaves took less money, how could they survive? So believe me when I say most northern people were not for ending slavery. The abolitionists tended to be rich white women. It came out of the Great Awakening, the temperance movement, the abolitionists, and that would then take them to the women's rights movement. The people in the South were very anti-abolitionist. They thought that it was a state's right to have slaves if they wanted to have them, and the North should stay out of their lives. Okay, which brings us to today. Like I stated a little earlier, the temperance movement, then the abolitionist movement, and then came the women's rights movement. And many of the people were interlocked. The names you're going to hear when we talk about the women's rights movement, you're going to learn about Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and lots of other famous women. So these rich white women who were trying to get the temperance movement, stopping drinking, and freeing the slaves, were like, wait a second, shouldn't we be also working for women's rights? And they wanted the right to be free, and they wanted the right to be free to vote and free to have equality. And one of the first things they did was they started the Seneca Falls Convention. It took place in 1848 in New York. And people came there, women, and there were some men. One of the interesting men was Frederick Douglass actually came. And they did do a Seneca Falls Declaration. Basically, they thought that women should have the right to vote, women should have equal rights, and they should have independence for themselves. Like I said, the main people that you're going to know are Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. You'll know Susan B. Anthony. She's on one of the dollars, the coins. So you might have seen her face before. After Seneca Falls, remember the Quakers believed everyone was equal. So you can see why the women from the Quakers, a lot of them already had freedoms because the Quakers believed that people were all equal. But they still didn't have the same rights. Some of the women you're going to read about were people that were trying to get women to be educated. One person was Catherine Beecher, and it's interesting. She thought women should get an education, but it was like so they could be better mothers and wives and work in the house, which is kind of interesting. I mean, do you really need to go to school to do that? But other people like Emma Willard, she educated herself, and she actually started her own school. It was called the Troy Female Seminary, and it had with math and science subjects that most women were not doing. And then another woman named Mary Lyons. She was a teacher for 20 years, and she opened her own college. It's called Mount Holyoke Female Seminary in Massachusetts. By the way, Mount Holyoke is still around today. The Lyons became the first principal, and she really helped women in education. Women that were married had very few rights, and these women wanted women to have more rights. At this time, if you were a woman and you got divorced, usually the husband got the kids, which is kind of interesting. Then you're also going to read about some breaking barriers for women, about the first doctors, the first women that became ministers, because women didn't get those roles. So it's an interesting section. Enjoy the women's suffrage today, and I'll get back to you tomorrow. Have a great day.